Today's scripture reading is from Mark 6, verses 1 through 13. Jesus left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown, and among their own kin, and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Then he went about among the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2, and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals, and not to put on 2 tunics. He said to them, "Wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you, and they refuse to hear you, as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them." So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick, and cured them. Here ends the reading.
Some years ago, at a conference of ministers, I heard an outstanding sermon on this Bible passage from Mark chapter 6. The minister shared a personal story. He had discovered that the church that initially formed his faith, the church where he grew up, had become available. And he really wanted to be the senior minister at this church. The minister was a United Methodist, and in United Methodist tradition, ministers are appointed, typically by bishops. And so he scheduled an appointment to meet with the bishop and to share with her, he was pleading with her, frankly, as to why he was the best fit for this church. He said he knew that church's culture like the back of his hand. He had grown up there. He shared with the bishop that he had some fundraising inroads at that church, and they were about ready to face a capital campaign. He also shared with the bishop that some extended family members still attended that church and would, have his back if something were to go wrong. She agreed and appointed him to his home church. Well, it was his 3rd Sunday, and following worship, he was shaking hands in the narthex, and he noticed out of the corner of his eye 3 older ladies, probably in their mid-80s, and they were all giggling together. They finally arrived at the place where they would shake his hand, and when they did, they shared back with him, "We remember you. Many years ago in the church nursery, we changed your diaper." A prophet is without honor in his own hometown. The minister then shared back with us that he only remained at that church for 3 years, and then he shook off the dust and moved on to serve a church for 11 years that was away from his hometown. The issue he shared was really an identity issue. It was an issue of them not being able to see him as, yes, an adult, to see him in the vocation of ministry, and to see him with some new, more prophetic ideas for that community. But the experience that he had there, he said, was not without a lot of hurt and pain. He said there were some days where he even would use a strong word to describe it. He felt betrayed. Do you think Christ felt that way when he returned to his hometown in Mark chapter 6? I can only imagine that he did. You'll recall the story that Carol read for us just a few moments ago. Jesus and the disciples are out teaching in Gentile territory, and in their journey, they decide to stop off at Jesus' hometown in Nazareth. When Jesus arrives in that hometown, he begins to teach with remarkable wisdom in the synagogue, and he performs some remarkable miracles, but his presence there ruffled the feathers of some. They began to ask the question, isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son? Don't we know his brothers, Joseph and Simon? Don't we know his sisters? And according to Mark, the gospel writer, many were even offended. That's when Jesus shared back with the disciples. A prophet who returns to his own hometown amongst relatives at his own house is without honor. The betrayal that Jesus experienced in this text had to have been hard and very, very painful. It was the betrayal of family, of a social circle, and yes, even a little bit of religious betrayal, perhaps. And I do wonder if we can resonate with Christ in this text. Have you ever, over the course of your lifetime, felt as though after you made a decision or shared an admission that in your own family you felt a little bit betrayed, as though they just didn't embrace you like they used to embrace you? Have you ever felt family betrayal? Or have you ever felt betrayal by a group, socially or with an organization or a league? You shared an idea or you moved in a different direction and you just didn't feel as embraced as you did previously. Or maybe even your betrayal felt a bit religious in context. You were part of a group or a ministry or a church, and you shared forth an idea, or you decided to move in a new direction, or you continued on in a certain way, and you just felt as though a group of people who once really accepted you decided not to embrace you much longer. You ever been there feeling betrayed? If so, hear the teaching of Jesus back to the disciples in this text. When betrayed, trust in God. Have the courage to continue forth and to move on from that place of betrayal, maintaining the identity of who God has called you to be. As scholars are quick to point out, especially in Mark's gospel, Jesus will embody a teaching like he did in Nazareth, and then go on to actually share forth with the disciples what the teaching was. Jesus says, just as I was not accepted back in Nazareth, I want you to know that from time to time on your own journey, you are going to be betrayed. You may be staying in a home and not be welcomed there. And when that happens, shake off the dust and continue to go down the road. I don't know about you, but the spiritual maturity of Jesus in this text really is worthy of my emulating. For when I think back over the course of my lifetime to situations when I've been betrayed, I do not often take the same course of Jesus. Often what I am tempted to do in that moment is to, throw mud backwards at that group that betrayed me. Or what I'll be tempted to do is just kind of put in my final jab and tell them what I think at the end, or probably send them an email on my way out the door. But I find it rather wise that Jesus in this text does none of the above. In fact, on his way out of Nazareth, he even heals a couple people as he moves on down the road. There's a wonderful Jewish proverb, it's not in the Bible, but a good proverb nonetheless, that really speaks of Jesus' self-control and ability to move on here. It's very wise and it epitomizes Christ in this moment of betrayal. And it's this: never throw mud into a well from which you once drank. Jesus spent no time throwing mud into Nazareth, but instead moves on down the road. When you are betrayed, do not be dismayed. One of my favorite preachers and authors is named Fred Craddock. And in a famous sermon on Mark chapter 6, Craddock told a story to which I think we can all relate when it comes to betrayal. And there was a wonderful purpose to this story that got boiled down into a one-liner that I will not soon forget. Story is about a young man who, upon birth really in his family, he was the one who was almost preordained to take over the family business. The young man grew up, he went to college, and he was very interested in taking over this family business. It was a lucrative business. He enjoyed it at first, but the more he got into it and the more he got to be second on the totem pole, if you will, prepared to take over, he realized over time that this family business was not for him and that God was calling him to move in a very different direction. So one evening he met with his family and he shared with them that that was not the direction where he felt he was called to go. And that family that was once so accepting and encouraging of him began to kind of push him over toward the fringes almost, and really was not pleased with his decision, and he no longer even felt affirmed by them for many, many weeks to come. And in struggling through this experience, he shared back with Craddock a one-liner that speaks almost precisely to Jesus in Mark chapter 6, and it was this. He said, "Sometimes God does not speak loud enough for the entire family to hear." And he moved on down the road into a new vocation. Betrayed, but not dismayed. On Thursday, we celebrated, of course, the 4th of July. And I was thinking about a wonderful book that I read about the Pilgrims, as we're part of Pilgrim tradition here as a congregational church. The book was entitled Making Haste from Babylon. And the book was by an author by the name of Nick Bunker, who wrote quite a bit about the original Mayflower voyage. And in this book, Bunker was talking a little bit about the reasons why the original Pilgrims boarded the Mayflower, everything from economic prosperity to a love of adventure, but also their disdain for the church in England and their sense of betrayal. And there was a moment in this book that was quite good when the Pilgrims, who were looking to be financed by the Virginia Company, wrote the Virginia Company a letter as to why they just felt they had to get on that ship. And one of the reasons was none other than betrayal. They said, "We have realized that we've gotten to the point that we can no longer wish ourselves at home. Would we have celebrated the glorious holiday last Thursday if it wasn't for a group of people who decided when they were betrayed that they would not be dismayed, but rather would go forth, shaking the dust off, sailing onward?" I'll share with you in closing a final reflection about this text that I read in preparing this message that I thought was quite good. There are a group of scholars that believe here in Mark chapter 6 that there's a later echo of this story in Mark's gospel and in other gospels in the New Testament that perhaps speaks to Jesus embodying these words of when you are not welcomed in a certain place, maintain your identity and keep going. And that place, interestingly enough, was the time in Jesus' life when Jesus served what we would know today as the Lord's Supper. For when the Lord's Supper is still celebrated to this day as part of the liturgy, the words of remembrance begin on the night in which Jesus was betrayed. Jesus took bread, broke it, gave thanks, and gave it to his disciples. As if to say, even when Jesus knew that he would be betrayed again, Jesus decided to keep on going, to share his unconditional love with the disciples, and yes, with all of us. Betrayed, but not dismayed, even in that moment of his life. Disciples, from time to time, you will not be welcomed. You will be betrayed. But when you are betrayed, do not be dismayed. Continue forth. Don't throw mud backwards. Instead, press on. Face the future unafraid. Shake off your feet and keep going.